Today, we're diving into a topic that often sparks heated debates in the United States: socialism. It's a word that can send shivers down the spines of some Americans, conjuring images of breadlines, dictators, and the inevitable collapse of capitalism as we know it. But is that really what socialism is all about? We'll explore the historical roots of the stigma surrounding socialism in America and look at real-world examples from around the globe. Because frankly, the American conversation about socialism often feels like it's happening in an echo chamber, with the same tired arguments and fear-mongering tactics being trotted out time and time again. To understand the deep-seated fear of socialism in America, we need to take a trip back in time. Imagine, if you will, the 1950s, a time of poodle skirts, drive-in movies, and a pervasive fear of communism that gripped the nation. This wasn't just your average case of the Mondays, folks. This was the Red Scare, a period of intense anti-communist paranoia fueled by Senator Joseph McCarthy and his infamous witch hunts. McCarthy, in a move that would make even the most enthusiastic conspiracy theorist blush, saw communists lurking behind every corner, under every bed, and probably disguised as the milkman. This fear-mongering wasn't just limited to actual communists. Socialism, often conflated with its more extreme cousin, became public enemy number one. Trade unions, civil rights activists, even people who just really liked public libraries, they were all branded as socialist threats to the American way of life. It was a time when even suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the government could play a role in ensuring social welfare was enough to get you blacklisted, ostracized, and accused of single-handedly trying to turn America into a communist dystopia. Now, you might be thinking that was decades ago. Surely we've moved past that kind of Cold War hysteria. And you'd be right to an extent. We're no longer sending people to re-education camps for owning a copy of Das Kapital. But the ghost of McCarthyism still lingers, casting a long shadow over any discussion about socialism in America. The word itself has become so loaded, so politically charged, that it's practically impossible to have a nuanced conversation about it. This brings us to the misconceptions that persist today. Many Americans still associate socialism solely with authoritarian regimes like Venezuela, failing to grasp the vast spectrum of socialist thought and practice. They imagine breadlines and government control, overlooking the successful implementation of social democratic policies in countries like Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. You know, those places consistently ranked among the happiest in the world. This lack of understanding and historical context has real-world consequences. It allows politicians to weaponize the word socialism to discredit any policy that smacks of government intervention, even if those policies are designed to benefit ordinary Americans. Universal healthcare? Socialism. Affordable housing? Socialism. A living wage? You guessed it, socialism. Now let's hop on a plane and get out of this American echo chamber for a bit, shall we? Because, believe it or not, there's a whole world out there where socialism isn't a dirty word. Let's start with those Scandinavian countries we mentioned earlier: Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. These Nordic nations are often held up as shining examples of democratic socialism in action. And no, before you ask, they haven't succumbed to some communist hellscape. They're actually quite lovely this time of year. These countries boast robust social safety nets, providing their citizens with universal health care, free or low-cost college education, and generous parental leave. They have high levels of income equality, strong labor unions, and a commitment to environmental sustainability. And here's the kicker: they also have thriving economies and high standards of living. It turns out you can have a system that prioritizes the well-being of its citizens without collapsing into economic ruin. Who knew? Now let's address the elephant in the room: Cuba. Yes, Cuba. I know what you're thinking. You just said we were going to look at success stories. And in many ways, Cuba is a cautionary tale about the dangers of authoritarianism and the suppression of individual liberties. But it's also a country that, despite facing a crippling U.S. embargo for decades, has managed to provide universal healthcare and education to its citizens. Yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are limitations. But it's essential to look at Cuba's achievements beyond just the Cold War perspective. Focusing only on that context oversimplifies the country's complex situation. It's like judging a book by its cover. And if that cover is a faded Che Guevara poster, you might miss the important story inside, getting caught up in discussions about Fidel Castro. And then there's Venezuela. Venezuela, the poster child for everything that can go wrong with socialism. And yes, Venezuela's economic and humanitarian crisis is a tragedy, fueled by government corruption, mismanagement, and a reliance on volatile oil revenue. But to lay the blame solely at the feet of socialism is a gross oversimplification. It's like blaming the Titanic, sinking solely on the fact that it had a buffet, while conveniently ignoring the giant iceberg-shaped hole in the side of the ship. Venezuela's problems are complex, and attributing them solely to socialist policies ignores the many other factors at play. Learning from global examples. So what can we learn from all of this? Firstly, that the American conversation about socialism is long overdue for an upgrade. We need to move beyond the Cold War rhetoric, the fear-mongering, and the oversimplifications. It's time to acknowledge that socialism is not a monolithic entity, but rather a spectrum of ideas and policies with varying degrees of success and failure. We need to look at real-world examples, both the good and the bad, with a critical and nuanced eye. What works in one country may not necessarily work in another, and it's important to consider the historical, economic, and cultural contexts in which these policies are implemented. Simply dismissing any policy with the faintest whiff of socialism as a one-way ticket to authoritarianism is not only intellectually lazy, but also incredibly unhelpful. Instead of resorting to tired tropes and fear-mongering, let's ask ourselves some important questions. What kind of society do we want to live in? Do we believe that everyone deserves access to basic necessities like healthcare and education? Are we willing to invest in our public infrastructure and social safety nets, even if it means paying a bit more in taxes? These are not easy questions, nor are there simple answers. But by engaging in honest and informed debate, by learning from the successes and failures of other nations, we can begin to craft a vision for a more just and equitable society. And who knows, we might even discover that some of those scary socialist policies are actually just common sense solutions that benefit everyone. Because at the end of the day, it's not about blindly embracing any one ideology, but rather about finding practical solutions to the challenges we face. It's about creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, not just the privileged few. And if that means having a frank and open conversation about the role of government and the distribution of resources, then so be it. We can handle a little bit of nuance, can't we, America? Consider the impact of reduced socialism on our ability to fight wildfires. With less funding for public firefighting services, there will be fewer resources for prevention and a less coordinated response to disasters. Real-world examples show us what we would lose: the ability to effectively manage and mitigate wildfires, putting countless lives and properties even more at risk. By learning from global examples, we can see the importance in the expansion of well-funded and coordinated public services that protect our communities from such threats. By looking at these global viewpoints, we can start to understand the complicated story of socialism in America. It's time to move beyond the fear-mongering and engage in a more informed and nuanced discussion. Let's challenge the outdated narratives, look at the evidence, and have those tough conversations about what kind of future we want to build. Let's continue this conversation and explore how we can learn from these examples to create a more informed and balanced view of socialism. Because ultimately, the goal isn't to turn America into a socialist utopia overnight. It's about having an honest conversation about the kind of society we want to create and being open to exploring all the tools at our disposal to get there. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the Blue Mindset 2.0 for more insightful videos.